Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So, what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today, Jami Kirkbride. Welcome to Imperfect Momming.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
You bet. I'm Jami Kirkbride, and I actually founded Parenting with Personality. And originally, I focused on helping parents understand their child's personality. I feel like it's such a key to mothering well, just kind of knowing the way your child is wired, some of their strengths, some of their struggles, some of their emotional needs, and then just kind of figuring out the communication or ways that your child is motivated. And so I originally started just kind of educating parents and speaking to different groups, and actually even wrote a book about children's personalities. But we actually went through some different situations with one of our children who had some significant mental health issues. And it kind of revolved around being highly sensitive, being intensely emotional, and just really struggling with being dysregulated a lot. And we really had to kind of put together some different pieces of his unique wiring to learn how to parent him well. And so I kind of pivoted my business a little bit, and I have a background as a professional counselor, and decided that I would instead like to work as a parent coach to help other parents who are struggling with a child who is highly sensitive or emotionally intense or exhibiting those challenging behaviors. So that's what I've been doing the last year and a half, is focusing on parent coaching.
I love that. And I have it, I'm very fascinated by personalities. And I had reached out to someone who has now I don't even remember what the personality type is, but it's where there's the 4 different letters.
Okay,
What
the
is that?
disc, I'm guessing.
It's not disc, but it's like the ENFJ.
Oh, okay. What is that? Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs. Thank you.
Yes.
I always forget about it. Or what it's called rather. And I watched a video on figuring out what your child's Myers-Briggs personality is. And
Right.
it turned out that my fiance and my son are the same. Uh,
Interesting.
and that made it just like opened up so much, like, oh, okay, so
Ah,
this is why they clash where they clash and why they get along really well where they get along. Um,
right.
so it's always kind of fascinated me since then. And Myers-Briggs was probably the first personality test where I was like, okay, this like I feel seen.
Yes, it can put together so many pieces for both parents and in understanding your children or a spouse or teachers. I mean, once you know personalities, it's like, I like to compare it to putting on a pair of glasses. You just see the world in a different way. And I think that honestly, I am a mom of 7. And I think if I didn't know the personalities, I think I would have lost my mind mothering, because every one of them is unique but yet similar in some ways. And when you can figure out what it is that you're feeling, and maybe why things work or why things don't work, or why they work with one but totally flop with another, it really brought so much together. And I liked the Myers-Briggs. what I needed though was something I could remember that was just a little bit easier because there's so many letters, I would always get confused.
Agreed.
And so I was actually able to train with an author that I had learned from when I was in junior high. And I joke about it and say that learning about personalities was as important as learning about the birds and the bees.
Mm.
But honestly, it really was because it gave me such a lens to see relationships and the way that you identify with people, the people you're drawn to, the people you struggle with. And like you said, when you can struggle with a child or when you really mesh with a child, and maybe even a child that you struggle with in so many ways, you may find that similarity and where you maybe share an interest or share maybe a strength that you both have, and finding how to use that for the best in the parent-child relationship. So that was one of the reasons that I had written this book a few years back, is I just wanted a way that moms, dads, parents could just simply, it's like a 4-quadrant system,
Mm.
and it kind of combines, each of us are kind of a combination of two. And of course, your birth order, your life experiences, even the personality of your parents, all of those can kind of change. I like to refer to it as the hue of your personality.
Mm.
And, it can change the degree to maybe, for example, you may be a really strong natural born leader. And if you're a firstborn, that leadership quality is probably even stronger. If you've had parents that were strong leaders or strong personalities, then it might be even stronger. Likewise, if you are somebody who's very, very laid back and you had laid back parents, or you had maybe an easier childhood and didn't really have to come up with a lot of different coping strategies, then your personality may look a certain way. And so I think figuring those things out really helped so many different parents that I was working with. And the light would just come on. And oftentimes it related kind of as the best tool for people whose child was maybe strong-willed, or what they were thinking was defiant or temperamental or difficult. And it really gave them tools to see that child in a whole new way. And when we look at it as a function of their personality or the way they were created or the way they've been gifted or kind of strength-based, we could help grow that personality and help them become all they were created to be.
I really like that. So tell us what the name of your book is.
Right. It's called The Yuzu. And it's actually the story of 4 little monkeys in the zoo. And so it's interactive, and you go through the story of these monkeys in the course of their day. And these monkeys make different decisions, and the decisions kind of relate to how different personalities might do things. And so as you read the story with your child, they pick which monkey is doing what they would choose to do. And then as a parent, you kind of tally their decisions, and then you take a parent observation assessment, and it kind of helps you figure out what personality might your child be. And some parents say, well, but what if they answer and you don't agree with their answers? And I love that, because it really doesn't matter,
Mm.
because they may be choosing what they think is more desirable. They may be choosing what they think you think they should do. And so no matter what information you get from it, it gives you such great insight into how your child thinks. Maybe what motivates them, maybe what scares them. It might even be what they're unsure about or what they still need to learn and grow in. And so that's one of the reasons I have loved in my coaching program. We always start with learning the personality of your child
Mm.
and learning your personality. And then we have kind of a common ground for whatever we're discussing to go back and say, now, what personality was your child? And what are their emotional needs? Because sometimes their behaviors escalate when their emotional needs aren't being met.
Mhm.
So if I'm dealing with a family whose child has intense emotions or is often dysregulated, we start with personality. We start with those needs. We start with, are we spending that one-on-one time to really meet those emotional needs? And sometimes those behaviors start de-escalating. And if they don't, that also gives us some other clues of pieces we may need to explore.
And it makes a lot of sense because if you think about yourself or you even you as a child, like when your needs are met, you feel calmer and more peaceful, right? Like you have like at least I'll speak for myself, like when I feel like my needs are being met, then I'm making healthier decisions and coming at things from a healthier place versus if I'm feeling tired, then I might be a little bit more snappy. And my son and I
Right.
have our secret language for when he asks me to do something after 9 o'clock. I tell him that I've taken my last breath, which means there's, I'll tell a quick story about uh
Yeah.
being pulled under in an undertow, like when surfers that are like really good swimmers when they dive in out surfing, it's usually because of an undertow. They get pulled down. There's
Right.
two separate undertows. So you get it pulled down by the first one. You have to like pause and allow yourself to get reoriented, and then you can swim towards the top. Where most people drown is they either swim, they don't allow themselves to get reoriented and they swim the wrong
Right.
direction, or they don't know that there's a second undertow and they come up to the surface and they let out their breath,
Okay.
anticipating being able to take in a deep breath. But then there's that second undertow, you now have no more oxygen and so you drown.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I love
so
that.
what I recognize in myself is that like there's a point at night where I'm like, I'm done. And I call that I let out my last breath. And so
Yeah.
my son knows that when he comes and asks for something and I'm snappy, I can say, I'm sorry, I let out my last breath. Or if he asks me for something and I just can't, and I have
Yeah.
that recognition that I can't, I can say, I'm sorry, dude, I let out my last breath, you know?
Yeah.
And it really, like I said, that's our little secret language.
I love that. I love that. I love that for two reasons. Number one, I love it because it's such a great comparison, to really have that word picture. I love word pictures. And as parents, I think word pictures bring so many things to life. I also love that because I think it represents the value in kind of having these shorthand ways that we learn to understand each other.
Mhm,
And sometimes it takes a little more work up front to kind of explain it or to help them understand a concept. But when we start using that, we can develop this shorthand that basically says to them, we have an understanding of each other. And,
mhm,
understanding your child, letting them feel like they're seen and heard and understood is the greatest way for us to love them. And
mhm,
so when they're feeling like we understand them, their behaviors or their emotions typically don't have to escalate because they feel heard and understood.
mhm.
And oftentimes those emotions can just kind of start regulating because they don't have to work so hard to convince you of what it is that they're feeling.
Yeah.
So I love that. That's a great illustration.
Yeah, thank you. I heard that in a coaching program. I was like, oh, that's what like, and then like the next day I lost my temper, and I don't lose my temper or like get snappy very often.
Yeah,
And so when I do, I kind of dig like what's going on.
what's going on
Um,
there?
and I love what you said about, learning how to communicate because the other secret language that we have is we talk about our love bucket. And,
Yes.
I check in with him. And this came from the five love languages.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I recommend that to every parent as well.
It's that,
Personalities and love languages are such keys to understanding and really speaking to their heart.
yeah.
I love
And because
that.
I recognized that I don't remember which came first, the chicken or the egg, but what I recognized was that my dad and I had similar love languages, but the way that we expressed our love was kind of hit and miss. And
Right.
so with my son, I asked him when he was really young and didn't understand what a love language was. I just asked him, what what do I do that makes you feel the most loved? And he said snuggling. And so I don't know if it's quality time, I don't know if it's physical touch, and it really doesn't matter. I just do the thing and I check in with him every once in a while, like, and it turned into this, how's your love bucket? Because he would say, Mom, my love bucket is empty, or my love bucket's at 20%. And I'd
Yeah.
say, what do you need? What do you want to do? And what he didn't recognize as he's gotten older, when I've asked him, how's your love bucket? He didn't know that, or we didn't know that there were multiple buckets. So there's an
Right.
overall bucket,
Right.
and then there's an attention bucket, and there's a play bucket, and there's, several different buckets.
Yeah.
And I said, dude, what I'm asking you, how's your love bucket? I'm talking about everything. Like, how do you feel? What is it that you need? Or is there anything that you need? And you can come to me and just tell me that I need something.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Love languages is another piece that we work on in this coaching program for highly sensitive or emotional kids. And that right there is exactly why, because we may be expressing love so deliberately to our child. We may be going all out and giving it our 110%, but we are likely communicating it in our love language because that's just what we identify with. And when we know their language, we can learn. Again, it's like another hack, a parenting hack. When you're speaking their love language, it doesn't take a great deal of it. It just takes the right kind. And so,
Mhm.
I find so many parents that feel like, oh my gosh, 15 minutes of one-on-one time and I have this many kids and how am I going to do that? And it's like, you know what? Let's just figure out what really speaks to your child's heart. What is it that really helps them feel seen and heard? Are they quality time? Do they like you to do things for them? Do they need words of affirmation? What is it that they really, really need? And when we focus our efforts on that, it like exponentially increases their connection.
Mhm.
I love
So
that.
we've been trying to figure out what it is, but in the last week or so, I've been trying to figure out like what motivates my son to do stuff. Because he says he's money motivated, but he's not. Um, you know, and so the other day I said, I was talking with my brother on the phone, and I said something that someone in our life had done to him. And he's like, don't tell Xander who did that. Xander wanted to know who did that so bad. I was like, okay, why don't you go do the cat poop real quick and I'll tell you who did
He
it.
likes to be in the know.
He likes to be in the know, that is for sure. Because he likes to know the answers. Like, that's a big thing for him, is
Yeah.
tell me why. Like, he's never grown out of the why stage, because I always answered the why question,
Yeah.
to the best of my ability.
Oh, now you have me wondering what he is. Do you think that he's more extroverted or introverted?
So he's pretty equal in both. Like, he's like 50-50.
Okay. What about this one? Would you say that he is more relationally focused or task focused? Like if something's going to be done, is he worried about the role and the job, or is he worried about the people along the way?
I
Like
think the
that
people.
everybody has a part, that people don't feel left out.
Yeah, I would say a little bit. So you gave me the example of the people. What's the example of the tasks?
The task would be more focused on this is what we're supposed to be doing, and this is how they told us we're supposed to do it. And we're not allowed to do it that way. We have to follow the rules for doing it this way. And we need to make sure it's done right because this is like they're going to check our work and we want it to be right. We want the work to be right. We want the way we do it to be right. The outcome needs to be what they're expecting or good enough.
Yeah, because he definitely because he cares about the people, but he wants to make sure that he's not wrong, or that he doesn't do things
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. Is he a natural born leader, or
Uh,
would he prefer somebody else lead and he follow?
no, he wants to tell
Got it.
everybody what to do.
Okay. I already have a feeling of where he would fit on one of
Yeah.
these quadrants. I'm guessing that he is what we would call a powerful and a proper.
Okay.
And that combination really does want to be in the know. What they really are oftentimes motivated by is to have some control in things. He probably also values that people give him credit for what he's done. Probably needs a little bit of space and a little bit of silence, but also values the fact that sometimes what he knows is just for him to know and maybe a little more private.
Mm.
Kind of will share it on a need to know basis with other people, but he really wants people to see him as responsible and to be valued for what he contributes. Do those sound pretty accurate for what you see in him?
I think so. Um, yeah. I'm really want to read your book.
Well, it's on Amazon. You can
Yeah.
find it if you look up the Yuzu and put Jami Kirkbride.
All right. I will definitely do that. So is there a piece of advice that you want to share with moms?
Oh man, I've been thinking of that. There's so much I would love to share, but I think, just really taking the time to realize that our children are all uniquely wired.
Mm.
And whether they're showing intense emotions, whether they're showing these, challenging behaviors, whether they're a strong personality, whatever it is, just really seeing them as unique individuals. And that when we take the time to figure out, what is their personality? What is their love language? I would encourage moms who have children who are struggling to figure out sensory processing issues. That was something I never knew existed until I had had 7 children. And all of a
Mm.
sudden, what I did for 6 was not working with the seventh. And I really had to pause and take the time to figure out what sensory processing was all about. And it was yet another piece of the puzzle that now I love encouraging moms to figure out, because especially when you're dealing with some of these escalated behaviors, it can be such an important piece to understand in how you deal with them and your expectations for them and how you work with them, the adjustments that you make, the skills you need to teach. So I think just really encouraging moms, dads, parents to take the time to put together the pieces and just start with that, that basic foundation of personalities and love language. Those are 2 quizzes I offer on my website because I just think they're so good for parents to just have that idea right off the bat. And even that much information gives such good insight. And then when you know that and there's other struggles, then you can kind of figure out where to start figuring out those other pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm glad you brought up the sensory stuff again too, because that was another situation that we had in honestly in communication, because um he does have uh some sensory stuff when it comes to his clothes. And he would always say, I want to wear comfy pants. And
Ah,
what I defined as comfy pants was different than his definition of comfy pants. And it was like, no, those are comfy pants. And he said, but they're not, because there's a lot of the pants for kids have elastic in the waist
with the
and
buttons
with the
and
buttons, and
yes, yeah,
it would hurt and it hurts. And maybe it's because the pants were too tight, and I haven't like really figured out that yet. We just have not been wearing pants that had those
yeah,
the elastic in it, which is really hard when he has a small waist and long legs.
right. And
And
that's about the only way you can make them fit.
mhm. Yeah. And my fiance is like, he's not the only kid, he's not the only tall, skinny kid. And I'm like, I know, but
They do
he
need to figure
doesn't
out
like how it
something.
feels.
Yes, they need to figure out something that isn't so bunchy, because seriously, for children that have any kind of sensory issues, that can really be a struggle. And
Mhm.
we saw it with clothing. He would come in the door from school and he would just shut all of his clothes and he would just go around in his boxers. And that was one of the first symptoms that I really started identifying as his body is in overload. He's
Mm-hmm.
managing all day with the feel of this clothing that is uncomfortable to him. And I was so excited when I could finally learn from an occupational therapist that there was something really valid here. Because in not knowing, I was contributing so many of his behaviors to him being defiant and difficult and misbehaving and not being respectful and being picky and being temperamental and just being difficult. And what I really had to learn was that his body was on overload. And the way his body was taking in these sensory messages was totally different than anyone else in our home. And he heard things differently. He didn't hear some things that we figured he was hearing. Even just the way he held his pencil, he couldn't feel his pencil in his fingers the way we feel it. If the one of the physical therapists, even or the occupational therapist, explained it to me like when we touch a push button phone, we feel each of those little buttons. She said the way his body works, it's like the flat desk. He doesn't feel what you feel. And imagine if that was happening for you. He doesn't know how hard he's pushing on his pencil. He doesn't know how hard he's holding his pencil. That's why his writing was so difficult. He would do things like they were doing his evaluation at the occupational therapist's office, and he would say like, okay, jump 5 times and then stop. And my child would jump like 7 times and then stop. And he'd be like, jump 3 times and then stop. And he'd jump 6 times and then stop. And I kept thinking, why is he being such a stinker? And then he was trying to do the written part of this test with him. And he just sat there and he just kept yawning and yawning and yawning. And it was so embarrassing that I felt like I should apologize. And I just wanted to say to my child, stop acting disinterested. Like you were being a stinker. Like pay attention and give him your best. And thankfully, this occupational therapist explained so much of what I saw during his evaluation. He brought my husband and I in apart from our child, and he said, did you notice how he kept yawning? And I was like, oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I was so embarrassed. And he said, no, he said, you need to understand that when his brain is called upon to do a task, his brain kicks into a mode that accesses sleep waves.
Hmm.
So his body is naturally like shutting down, calming down when his brain is needing to alert and think harder. So he said he couldn't control that. That was very, very legitimate. And he said, and when I asked him to jump and then stop, and I was like, I know, I'm sorry. Like, I know he can hear. Like, I don't know why he was doing that. He said, no, you know what? It's not a matter of hearing. It's the way his wiring takes in the message and then uses it. So sometimes it can be right on, and other times it's going to be a miss.
Hmm.
But it gave me a totally different insight into his behavior that I was seeing. And I really had to learn that so much of what I was easily considering disrespect toward me, or just being a difficult, strong-willed child or disobedient, was actually related to his sensory processing, the way he was taking in information, the way his brain would process it, and then the way his brain would use it.
Mhm.
And it really opened my eyes in so many ways. And so I just love encouraging parents to, figure out if your child might be having sensory issues, because so many times we may choose to, give consequences or discipline for something that honestly may be relating more to their processing or their unique wiring than it is to defiance or disrespect. And we can really, tarnish a relationship, we can damage a relationship if we continue to do that instead of understanding where it's coming from, teaching skills, or maybe modifying expectations, and then working toward a better connection and a better understanding. And I can tell you this, meal times used to be one of our worst
Mm.
times of the day. And I got to the point where I would seriously dread every mealtime.
Mm.
And for 6 other kids, we had expectations where you just showed up, you didn't complain about the food, you cleaned up your plate, and then you were finished. And it never worked for him. Only after learning about sensory processing did I realize that eating is one of the main activities that accesses the greatest number of sensory systems.
Hmm.
And it's tactile, it's the things, holding the fork, it's the texture of the food, it's proprioceptive, where their body is in space. Kids that fall off their chair at dinner time, it might not be that they're trying, it's that they aren't real aware of where their body is in space and how to control their body in space.
Hmm.
Smelling siblings at the meal, he would complain about, you didn't brush, you didn't put on deodorant, or I can hear you chewing. All of these things related to sensory overwhelm. And if the food looked different, that's, the sight portion of it. If it tasted different, if the temperature was too hot, too cold, too spicy, he couldn't taste it. He had this real anxiety around the food as well as the process of eating it. And only through understanding sensory was I able to adapt some of the things that related to mealtime so that we could actually have meal times that felt like what I wanted our family to experience. But no amount of consequences, no amount of discipline was going to fix that,
Yeah.
because it was more a function of his sensory input and how it affected him. And it really took flexibility on my part to understand.
Yeah. And it's what's just running rampant in my mind is, well, all of those things, maybe not every single one of them, but it's because there's only my son and my fiance and I, like it's the three of us, but the holding of the spoon, we had a whole thing around that. Um, and just so many different things that you mentioned. I'm like, holy cow. And what's going through my mind is, this concept of manners and what's socially appropriate, sitting upright in your chair, holding your spoon correctly, not, slurping your food or
Right.
all of these things, not falling over in your chair, like all of these things being like, how do you work around these sensory processing things and also have manners and social appropriateness? Like, is this just going to be something that has to evolve, or
Right.
are there workarounds?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that so many parents ask. Like, do I just have to adjust forever? Or like, can we teach them these things? And I love it because I think at first it takes flexibility on our side. For, like, here's an example. I just wanted our family to sit down and have a peaceful meal together. Like meal times are so valuable, right? To the health of a family. They didn't feel very helpful nor healthy. And so I had to realize, if I want our meal times to feel calm and peaceful, I might need to make some adjustments. And in the process of making those adjustments, his anxiety started to lower. So one of the very first things that I had to be flexible on was, I mentioned this, the sounds and the smells of siblings sitting nearby. He couldn't sit with a sibling on both sides of him. And you can imagine, with a family of 9, our meal times can be pretty loud and pretty overwhelming, with lots of extra stimulus of sights and sounds and smells. And
Absolutely.
so I let him sit at the bar, and if he didn't want to sit at the table with us, that was okay. And it killed my heart at first because I just wanted us to all sit together. But as he saw that I understood that some days he just needed a little more space, he was able to come to the table without his anxiety heightened. So we got to the place where if he came in and he was starting to ask a lot of questions about dinner, that was my first sign that he was probably starting to kind of loop, kind of start stirring on what he was going to have to deal with. And the unexpected is a huge trigger for these kiddos. So
Mhm.
he may come in and he may say, "What's for dinner?" That in itself was already alerting me to the fact that if it was something that was unfamiliar, he was already worried about the taste, the texture, if it would be something he'd like. I mean, everything was like domino effect from there. So the minute he would ask, "What's for dinner?" I would usually say, "Well, this is what we're having." And then I would kind of pause and I would kind of see what his response was. If it looked like that was like he could go with that, then we probably didn't need to make many alterations. But if he continued asking questions, or if he started giving me very abrupt answers, that was usually my sign that his body was being a little triggered. And so in that case, I would say, this is what we were going to have. And then, like I talked about, sometimes you have to do a little bit of that work up front so that you can have the shortcut later. We actually had to develop a system where if I was serving something that he didn't feel like he could handle, there were three other options that we had already agreed upon that would be good ideas. And it was simple things, not that I would have to create something big and hard. It might be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It might be microwavable nuggets. It might be eggs that we made in the microwave, something simple and easy that if I was serving something and he didn't feel like he could do it, he already knew what a feasible other option would be. And we didn't have to argue about it. He could just say, I don't think I can do that today. Or if it was, the noise of the family, the smells of the family, if he was having a hard time, I might say, do you need a little more space today? Would you like to sit over here and not be at the table? And I can tell you this, we ate out 2 times where he chose not to sit at our table with us and sat at a different place at Subway. And it killed my heart a little bit because here's like the whole rest of us. And I knew people noticed. One lady was even like, well, isn't he going to eat with you? And I'm like, today he's just kind of wanting a little bit of space. Only 2 times did he have to do that. And I can't help but think that what he really needed was just to know that I understood.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times those behaviors don't have to continue because they learn to start expressing what it is that they need.
Yeah.
Today's a hard day. I think I'm just going to have a peanut butter and jelly. Or I think I'm going to sit at the end of the table instead of by everybody else. Teaching them that they can speak up is so empowering to them to getting their needs met. And really, sensory processing relates to more needs and getting needs met. So, we can talk about personality needs, we can talk about emotional needs, you can talk about love needs, and then there's those sensory needs. And what we really want to teach them to do is to learn to pay attention to themselves, that when they need something, they know how to ask for it. And that's one of the toughest parts about sensory processing, is that a lot of times they don't even know how to read their own body's messages. And so we really have to start helping them understand what it is that they're feeling and what does that mean. Oh, you know what? It looks like your body's overwhelmed because there's so much noise going on. What if we shut down the TV and then I gave you some directions on your chores tonight? Or how about if we go into the next room where everybody isn't talking? Figuring out ways that you can help them learn to adapt for what their body needs for that sensory input, as well as just speaking like, today I've just hit my limit. I talk about being in the body budget red. When they're body budget red, you change your expectations, but you also have to teach them, before you get to body budget red, you can take breaks. Breaks help you give your brain breaks. And when your brain starts feeling overwhelmed, you might feel this or you might feel that. And that's kind of your brain's way of saying, I need a break.
Yeah. I like everything that you just said, and especially that last bit, because that would be like the thing that I notice when mostly with video games, where
Yes.
he's trying, not getting the thing that he wants, and then getting frustrated. And I'm always saying, maybe now's a good time to take a break, but instead of telling him take a break, encouraging him to notice the signals on his own, to take a break on his own. And he has, I've seen him do that too. And so there's, a little
Yeah.
bit of telling them, a little bit of allowing them to
That's
do it on
right.
their own.
And
Yeah.
you know what? It's interesting that you bring up electronics, because so many of these kiddos with neurodiverse wiring struggle so much with electronics and disconnecting from them, almost so much that it seems like an electronic addiction. And one of the things that I learned that really helped was, if I wanted him to take a break, it is hard for their brains, legitimately, not just because your child's being difficult, but because of their wiring. It is hard for them to shift from an activity of high preference, which is the gaming, to a idea of something that they can do or an activity or whatever of no preference. And
Mm.
so we need to kind of bridge the gap from a high preference to something they don't prefer with what is something else that they do prefer. And for many of them, it might be TV. And sometimes, and this was really hard for me, and it took some real adjustment on my part and working with a counselor that helped me understand these issues, that helped me see that while it felt bad for me to go from computer to TV, if that is what his brain wiring needed to step away from it, it was well worth the time and not having the explosion of emotions. So
Mhm.
it might mean 10 minutes, like, hey, you know what? It sounds like you're getting really worked up. What if we paused the game and you went and maybe we could read a book or you could watch 10 minutes of TV and then come back and try again? That might be better than expecting them to take a break from something of high preference to something they don't prefer at all. Like, hey, let's go outside. Well, I don't want to go outside. Providing something that is just a step down instead of a huge step away from it. Because honestly, so many of these kiddos who are neurodiverse have minds that just work at a high, high speed.
Mhm.
And two things that work at that matched high speed are computer and TV. And so much of their environment doesn't keep up with their speed, but those two things do. And that's why their brains key into them and why it really keeps their attention. And
Mm.
so people may say, oh, I don't know that my child has ADHD because he can sure pay attention to those games on computer. Well,
Mhm.
yeah, he can, because you know what? That's part of the ADHD superpower. A child with ADHD has the superpower of hyperfocus for things of high preference. But when they're dealing with other things, they may struggle to ever find their attention.
Mm.
And so I think it's so interesting to just learn about the unique ways that our children's brains are wired. Whether they're neurodiverse, neurotypical, whatever their personality is, their love language, their sensory processing, they all have unique wiring. And when we know those pieces, we can help them learn to adapt, to master some of those skills they struggle with, and also teach them, once they've learned how to read their bodies, to ask for what they need. And at the next point would be that they learn to be flexible. And so sometimes I think we as moms have to model that flexibility up front, because that is how they're going to learn what that flexibility down the line looks like.
Mhm.
And that just because we do it this way today doesn't mean we always do that. Maybe it's that, what? Today was a really hard day at school. I'm totally spent. It might be a day where maybe you watch TV for 15, 20 minutes and then do chores.
Mhm.
When maybe your usual rule is chores before TV. But when we make that adjustment for where they're at, they can start gaining trust for that and then ask for what it is that they need. And really, that's the skill we want them to learn in life, that they can advocate for what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk about this forever and ever. And tell us a little about a book that has been instrumental in your personal development journey.
Well, after all of this talk about sensory processing, I wanted to make sure that you could know of a good book to learn more information. It's Sensory Processing 101, and it's by Dana Abraham. And the reason I love this is because she talks about all 8 of the sensory systems. And I think in science, we all learned that there were like 5. There's 8, and those other 3 that are actually out there are super important to the way our kids function. And I love it because she writes part of the chapter from a parent's perspective, and part of it is from an occupational therapist perspective. And so I think she just does a great job in there just describing all of the sensory systems and things that you might see and how to work with them.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I'm thinking of the neurodivergent Facebook group that I'm part of, that I'm going to share this episode with, as so they can
Great.
also hear about the book, because I know that um it's a lot, and especially when you have more than one. And I had one guest who had her family is neurospicy, and I was like, I love that.
Yes. I have some families in my coaching program that have 3, 4, even 5 kiddos that have, anxiety, depression, ADHD, DMDD, you know, There's so many different things that families deal with, and it takes so much to just put the pieces together and then figure out, how do I help this child become all that he was created to be? And I think we can do that so much better when we have these pieces of the puzzle to fit together, whether it's personality or love language or sensory processing. Those are some key pieces to really understanding them and loving them.
Yeah, I love all that. Where can our listeners find you?
You bet, at parentingwithpersonality.com, and also on Facebook and Instagram at Parenting with Personality. And I would love to connect with anybody. I always welcome emails, Jami at parentingwithpersonality.com. If you have questions, if there's information you would like more about, I just love to connect with parents and just encourage.
And I appreciate that on a personal level, but also for on a global level, that what you're doing in the world and how you're helping. Thank you
Well,
for
thank you.
everything that you said today, because I'm like, oh, I have some research to do on some.
Yes, I think you're
Yeah.
going to really, really like
Yeah,
it. Yeah, you bet. And thank you for what you do. And thank you for having me here today. If I can ever be of help in any other topics, I hope you feel like you can get in touch.
absolutely. Thank you so much. And there will be another episode of Imperfect Momming for you all coming next week. And until we meet again, keep healing. Bye, guys. Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AliciaLyons.com. That's ALYSIALYONS.com. See you next time.